first sound was the siren, not outside, but inside my head. I remember the way it sliced through the night air as I turned the corner and saw the school library ablaze, windows trembling with the roar of fire. The world was a blur of red lights and running feet. Smoke rolled out of the double doors like a living thing. "Lily," I shouted, my throat tearing from the heat and terror. Firefighters swarmed at the entrance, shouting orders, dragging hoses, their boots slamming against soaked asphalt. Someone grabbed my arm, strong hands, holding me back, but I fought them until I heard it. A faint voice, my daughter's, somewhere behind the glass, crying for help. The sprinklers inside had failed. Only ash-filled water dripped from the eaves. Through the haze, something flickered, a security camera light blinking above the doorway. And in that flicker, just before the flames swallowed the frame, I saw it, the sleeve of a yellow blazer moving away from the fire. My heart froze. There was only one person in this town who wore that color like armor. The woman who'd smiled at every meeting, lectured every parent, and measured every blade of grass, Karen Aldrich, president of the HOA. The firefighter shouted that it was too late to go in, that the oxygen levels were dropping, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The world had narrowed to a single image, my daughter trapped inside, and a woman walking away from the smoke she'd made. Later, they would call it an accident. But standing there under the sirens, my face wet with more than just rain, I already knew better. She thought this was just a building on fire. She didn't know she'd lit a war she couldn't contain. Mornings in Cedar Ridge had a rhythm that felt almost sacred. The sun rose slow and golden through the sycamore trees. The sound of sprinklers ticked in perfect rhythm with the birds, and somewhere down the block, a delivery truck rattled past houses so identical they looked printed. My mornings began the same way every day. Black coffee, quiet kitchen, and a gentle rustle of papers as my daughter, Lily, finished her homework at the counter. She was 12, all curiosity and grace, a girl who treated the world as a book waiting to be read. She had that rare patience that children often lose too early. She'd trace her finger along every paragraph, mouthing words softly until meaning bloomed. I used to joke that she'd make a better lawyer than me, calm, observant, relentless when she cared about something. That fall, she cared about the library. Her school's community kindness project had been her idea, collecting unused books, repainting the reading corner, and setting up a shelf for kids who couldn't afford their own. The library wasn't much, just a warm, sunlit room at the end of the hallway, smelling of paper, pencil shavings, and old glue. But to her, it was a cathedral. "Dad," she'd said one evening, cheeks smudged with blue paint, "it's not about books. It's about giving people somewhere quiet to feel safe." I've smiled, pretending not to tear up, pretending not to notice how much she already sounded like her mother. We lived 3 streets away from the school, in a neighborhood managed by the local HOA, a place where lawns were trimmed to regulation height and paint colors had to be approved for harmony. That harmony had a face, Karen Aldrich. Every town has one, the self-appointed keeper of order, the woman with a clipboard that could end your week. She wasn't cruel outright. She was composed, meticulous, always dressed like she was attending a council hearing. She'd wave from her porch in her signature yellow blazer. It's the same color as caution tape, and remind neighbors about community standards as if it were scripture. To newcomers, she was polite. To everyone else, she was a storm in tailored heels. I'd met her first at a school board fundraiser. She spoke with the kind of practiced charm that hides edges, every compliment wrapped around a correction. "Lovely presentation, Mr. Graves," she'd said after my short speech on school safety. "Though perhaps next time you could use fewer legal terms. People here like things simple." I'd smiled, nodded, and marked her tone in my mind like a line of evidence. That was Karen's way. Make the correction sound like kindness. Make control sound like care. Lily adored her school. The chalkboard smell, the worn wooden desks, the librarian, Ms. Harmon, who always had new mystery novels tucked under her arm. On most afternoons, I'd find Lily perched on the library floor, surrounded by piles of donated books, labeling them with her neat handwriting. Sometimes, Miss Harmon would tell me, "Your daughter sees good where most people see trouble." I believed her, but not everyone did. Around late September, tension began to hum beneath the quiet. The district approved small funds for the library's renovation, fresh paint, better lights, a new reading nook, and suddenly, Karen was everywhere. School meetings, budget reviews, HOA newsletters warning about misallocated resources. She claimed the project violated zoning protocols because community funds should first support neighborhood safety, not aesthetic projects. She used that word, aesthetic, like a weapon. The PTA meetings that used to end in laughter started ending in silence. Even Ms. Harmon avoided eye contact when Karen spoke. I noticed small things changing. A donation box disappeared from the school hallway. The maintenance team canceled their volunteer day without notice. Lily came home one afternoon, clutching a folder tighter than usual. "Dad," she said softly, "Miss Aldrich told me that painting walls without permission is vandalism." She tried to laugh it off, but I saw the way her smile trembled. I told her, people like that live in fear of losing control, and that kindness, even when ignored, always finds its way through. But deep down, I recognized the shift. Karen had found something to target. And this time, it wasn't policy. It was my daughter. At the next PTA meeting, I watched it happen. Lily stood beside Ms. Harmon, presenting her library project with a bright poster and trembling hands. Karen sat in the front row, arms crossed, her yellow sleeve catching the stage light. She didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. Her expression alone was enough. A thin, amused smile that said, "I'll decide what belongs here." When the applause came, it was hesitant. Karen leaned toward another parent, whispering something that made them look down uncomfortably. I saw it all from the back of the room, the quiet ripple of power. The way order disguised itself as concern. That night, Lily went to bed early, her project neatly stacked beside her desk. Outside, porch lights flickered across identical driveways, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at nothing. I stood by the window, watching Karen's house, her car parked perfectly within the white lines, her blinds drawn tight. For the first time, the neighborhood didn't feel safe. It felt staged. And as the wind moved through the trees, caught myself wondering, when someone like Karen decides you've broken her rules, how far will she go to make you pay for it? It started small, the kind of thing most people would dismiss as a misunderstanding. But with Karen, nothing was ever small. Her power didn't come from yelling. It came from precision, knowing exactly where to cut so no one could call it cruelty. It was a Wednesday morning when I first heard about the incident. Ms. Harmon called me after class, her voice uneasy. "Mr. Graves," she began, "Lily didn't do anything wrong. Please note that first." She was helping Ethan and Maya, the two special needs students, rearrange the bottom shelves in the reading corner. They can't reach the upper levels, and she thought it'd be nice to make a section for them. She paused. But Ms. Aldrich, she called it a disruption. I remember gripping the phone tighter. A disruption. Yes. She came in unannounced, said the students were blocking aisles and violating study order. She told Lily to sit down immediately, loudly. When I arrived at the school that afternoon, the air already felt heavier. Children moved through the hallways quieter than usual, eyes flicking toward the principal's office where Karen's bright yellow blazer glowed behind the glass like a warning sign. She was seated beside Principal Rayner, her clipboard open, pen tapping rhythmically against the paper. Lily sat across from them, small and still, her knuckles white against her folder. "Mr. Graves." Karen greeted me with that tone, the one that pretends civility while savoring dominance. "We were just discussing your daughter's disregard for established library protocols." "She was helping her classmates," I said, evenly. Karen smiled thinly. "That's what she calls it." but she was relocating materials without authorization. If every student decided to take initiative, imagine the chaos. Principal Rayner looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers. "We just want to ensure everyone follows procedure," he said, his voice cautious. Eyes darting between us like a man afraid of taking sides. I looked at Lily, her face pale, eyes glistening but defiant. "Did you raise your voice?" I asked her softly. She shook her head. "No, Dad. I just wanted them to reach the mystery books." Karen crossed her legs. "Intentions are irrelevant. Structure keeps order. I've already filed a formal note for disciplinary review." "Disciplinary note. Standard procedure," she said coolly. "I serve as the community liaison for student safety and property usage. The board needs to maintain consistency." Consistency. That word again, her favorite weapon. She wielded it like a blade wrapped in red tape. After the meeting, as we stepped out, whispers followed us down the hallway. Teachers avoided my gaze. One of them, Mr. Hanley, gave a small nod, sympathetic but silent. Nobody wanted trouble with Karen. She was the kind of person who remembered every ear roll, every sigh, and would find a way to make you regret it 6 months later in the form of an audit or a complaint. That evening, an email arrived from the HOA mailing list. Concerns regarding library conduct, written by Community President Ms. K. Aldridge. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but everyone in town received it. It warned of recent behavior among students, reflecting a lack of discipline and respect for shared spaces. No names mentioned, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew. By morning, the bakery clerk, the mail carrier, even the woman who jogged past our house daily gave me those looks, sympathetic, distant, pitying, at the next school board meeting. Karen made her move. The auditorium was filled with parents and teachers, the air thick with polite tension. She took the microphone during the community remarks segment, her voice smooth and measured. "I want to address a concerning trend," she said, glancing toward the audience. "Students engaging in unauthorized changes to school property under the guise of kindness. While good intentions matter, order matters more. Our children must learn boundaries, not just compassion." The audience murmured. A few heads nodded uncertainly. I stood up. "If compassion needs authorization," I said quietly, "maybe we're teaching the wrong lesson." Karen turned her head slightly, that poised smile never faltering. "Mr. Graves, no one is questioning kindness, but this is about respect for rules. Every institution stands on structure, even the smallest one." The principal shifted uncomfortably. Someone tried to change the topic, but Karen pressed on. "Perhaps your daughter meant well, but she must understand there are procedures." I met her eyes. She understands more about humanity than some adults I know. The crowd went silent. For a heartbeat, her smile cracked barely. Then she recovered, tilting her head. "Rules are rules," she said, voice soft but sharp. "We all have to learn that." Afterward, Lily sat beside me in the car, staring out the window, trying to be brave. Streetlights flicked across her face like passing ghosts. "Dad," she said, "why does she hate me?" I didn't answer right away. I watched Karen's house pass by, porch lights bright, every flower trimmed perfectly. "Because you remind her what she's lost," I finally said. Days passed, but the ripples didn't fade. The librarian began locking up earlier, citing new safety protocols. Lily's project proposal was suddenly under review. Even her friends grew cautious, scared of being seen helping her. Karen had drawn invisible lines through the school, and everyone, afraid of her reach, learned to step carefully. One afternoon, I caught sight of Karen near the parking lot talking to a teacher. She turned when she saw me, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Mr. Graves," she greeted, as if nothing had ever happened. "How's your daughter?" "She's fine," I said. "Resilient." Karen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, her smile tight. "Good. Children need resilience in this world. especially when they step out of their lane. Before I could respond, she turned away, clipboard tucked under her arm, yellow sleeve gleaming in the afternoon sun like a flag of quiet victory. That night, Lily found a folded slip of paper in her locker, the copy of her disciplinary note. The bottom, written in careful, looping handwriting, was a single sentence in red ink. Maybe she should learn to stay in her place. It wasn't signed, but it didn't have to be. In Cedar Ridge, everyone already knew whose handwriting that was. The day it happened began like any other. The kind of ordinary day that tricks you into believing nothing bad can touch you. The sun hung low over Cedar Ridge, washing the brick walls of the school in amber light. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass and chalk dust. I remember glancing at the clock around 4:15 p.m., telling myself Lily would be home soon. She had stayed after class again to finish her community kindness project, cataloging the last batch of donated books. She texted me just 20 minutes earlier. Almost done, Dad. Miss Harmon says I can finish this shelf and go. I smiled at my phone, proud, unaware that those few words would be the last calm thing I'd read that day. Around that same time, Karen Aldridge was seen walking briskly toward the school. She carried her clipboard, always her clipboard, and wore her yellow blazer, despite the heat. The janitor later told investigators she'd mentioned an inspection for fire safety compliance. Though the school hadn't scheduled one, she'd flashed her HOA badge like it was a government credential and walked straight in through the side door that maintenance usually kept propped open. Inside, the library was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft whisper of turning pages. Lily sat cross-legged on the carpet, stacking books in small, neat towers beside Miss Harmon's desk. Miss Harmon looked up when Karen entered. "Oh, hello, Miss Aldridge. School's closed for the day. Can I help you?" Karen smiled, that slow, deliberate smile. "Just a quick check. We've received complaints about new furniture being installed without safety clearance." Miss Harmon frowned. "It's a student project, all approved by the board." Karen's eyes moved over the room like a camera lens, cataloging details. "And yet, I don't recall seeing a permit request." Lily, hearing her voice, stiffened slightly, but stayed silent. She knew better now. Karen's calm was a trap. The conversation sharpened. Voices rose, echoing faintly down the hall. Another teacher, Mr. Hanley, passing by the door, would later testify that he heard Karen say, "Rules protect people, Miss Harmon, even from themselves." He didn't stay long enough to hear the reply. By 5:30, most of the school was empty. The janitor locked up the gym. The security guard made his final round, and the parking lot fell still. Karen was seen leaving through the same side door, calm, unhurried, adjusting her blazer as she walked to her car. The security camera above the entrance caught a flicker of her figure, distorted by sunlight, and then went dark for several minutes. A glitch the technicians later said was unusual. At 6:12 p.m., the fire alarm went off. Neighbors first saw smoke rising from the back of the school, thin at first, and then black and billowing. The library windows glowed orange, then burst outward with a sound like thunder. The old books burned fast, dry paper and polish-fed flames that roared through shelves like they'd been waiting for oxygen. Sprinklers never engaged. Firefighters would later find the main valve manually shut. I was 2 blocks away when my phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing across the screen. It was Miss Harmon, coughing, panicked. "The library's on fire," she rasped. "Lily's, she's still inside." I don't remember hanging up. I just remembered the world narrowing to a tunnel of sirens and smoke. By the time I reached the school, the building was wrapped in chaos, flashing red lights, hoses snaking across the pavement, officers shouting. The air reeked of burnt paper and plastic. I tried to run past the barricade, but a firefighter caught me around the chest. "You can't go in there, sir. Oxygen's gone. My daughter's inside," I shouted, thrashing against his grip. He hesitated, just long enough for me to see what he didn't want to say. Behind him, through the shattered glass, I could see the fire swallowing the far shelves, the section where Lily had been working. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a small silhouette through the smoke. Then it was gone. They pulled her out minutes later, alive, barely conscious, coughing through an oxygen mask. Miss Harmon had dragged her toward an emergency exit before collapsing herself. Paramedics rushed both of them to ambulances. Lily's hair smelled of smoke for days after. Her palms were blistered from gripping metal door handles too hot to touch. That night, I stood outside the wreckage long after everyone else had gone. Rain began to fall, turning the ash into streaks that ran down the brick walls like tears. The firefighters had finished their report, 'cause undetermined, possible electrical fault. But even then, something gnawed at me. I walked toward the caution tape, squinting at the building's entrance. There, just above the doorframe, the damaged security camera blinked, still alive, still recording fragments. The screen on the responding officer's tablet showed flickers of static. Then, for 1/2 second, an image, a yellow sleeve, disappearing into the dark. Just before the flames rose, my knees went weak. It wasn't proof, not yet, but my gut already knew. That shade of yellow didn't belong to chance. It belonged to her. When the rain stopped, steam still curled from the building's bones. The smell of burned pages hung heavy in the air, the scent of stories that would never be read again. I stared at the blackened doorway. My reflection caught faintly in the puddles, and felt something shift inside me. Grief has a sound. It isn't a cry or a scream. It's the quiet inhale before the storm. They called it an accident. But deep down, as the firefighters rolled up their hoses and the last lights faded into the night, I whispered the truth to myself for the first time. No, it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this fire, and beneath the rain and the ash, the war Karen Aldridge had started finally had a name. The hospital lights were too white, sterile, humming, indifferent to the smell of smoke that still clung to my clothes. I remember sitting outside Lily's room, my hands blackened at the edges from ash I hadn't noticed, watching the rhythm of the oxygen monitor rise and fall. Each beep was proof of life, but each silence between them felt like punishment. Through the small glass window, I could see her, pale, her hair damp against the pillow, lips cracked from heat. Her small fingers twitched occasionally, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. They said she was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. The corridor outside her room was crowded with voices that didn't belong to the grief. They discussed reporters, administrators, insurance representatives, all speaking in the language of damage control. Preliminary reports indicate an electrical fault in the West Wing, one of them said. Sprinkler malfunction due to outdated infrastructure. Another voice, the superintendent, I think, muttered something about issuing a press statement by morning. They all spoke of logistics, timelines, liability. Not one of them said her name. By dawn, the local news had already framed the story. Library fire leaves 2 injured. Officials cite wiring malfunction. The article included a photograph of the charred building, smoke still curling from its roof like a fading memory. Beneath it, the HOA had posted a formal message on their community page. I read it 3 times. We are deeply saddened by the tragic incident at Cedar Ridge Middle School. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims. We remind all residents that safety begins with responsibility and encourage families to speak to their children about respecting public property. I felt something inside me twist. Safety begins with responsibility. The phrase was Karen's handwriting, even when it wasn't signed. She'd managed to turn a fire into a lecture, to turn my daughter's trauma into a sermon about control. When I finally spoke to the fire chief, he didn't look me in the eye. "We'll run chemical tests," he said, flipping through his clipboard. "But right now, the pattern looks like a short circuit." His tone was routine, his pity practiced. I nodded, but I had investigated too many fires in my former life to believe that. I knew what electrical burn smelled like, that sharp tank of copper and ozone. What I'd smelled outside the library that night was different. Sweet, synthetic, almost oily, accelerant residue. It wasn't memory playing tricks. It was muscle memory, the kind that never fades once you've stood in too many rooms where flames tell lies. After the chief left, I walked to the vending machine near the lobby and stared at my reflection in its glass. My eyes were red, not from tears, but from smoke and fury I couldn't show yet. People think grief explodes. It doesn't. It condenses into something sharper, colder. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA community page again. Karen had posted a follow-up comment beneath the official statement. It's heartbreaking that negligence can lead to tragedy. Our children must learn accountability. One careless act can endanger many. There were likes, sympathy comments. Someone even wrote, "So true, Miss Aldrich. Kids these days don't think." I wanted to reply, to type out every truth I knew about her blazer, her timing, her control, but I didn't. Instead, I saved a screenshot back in Lily's room. The nurse was adjusting her for. "She's stable," she said gently. The smoke inhalation was severe, but she recovered. She kept asking for you, even when she could barely breathe. I nodded, walking to her bedside. Her eyelids fluttered as I touched her hand. "Dad," she whispered, her voice fragile, the sound of something half broken. "I'm here," I said, forcing steadiness I didn't feel. She hesitated, her lips trembling. "Miss Aldrich." She was there. I froze. "You saw her. She came in before the fire," she whispered. She said she needed to check something. Then she left. It smelled weird, like paint, but stronger. Her voice faded, the monitors humming softly beside her. I stayed still for a long time, my hand tightening around hers, my heartbeat sinking with the machine. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want, but expected. Karen hadn't just been near the scene. She'd been in it. That night, after Lily finally slept, I walked outside into the parking lot. The air was cold, metallic, carrying the faint echo of sirens somewhere far away. A police cruiser idled near the entrance. I watched its red lights blink rhythmically, the way the library security camera had before it died. The same pattern, the same silent witness. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos I'd taken from the fire site. Melted metal, collapsed shells, burned flooring. My fingers zoomed in on a dark streak near the doorframe, something most people would mistake for soot. But I recognized it, the viscous residue of liquid accelerant, clinging in uneven swirls. A telltale fingerprint left by someone who thought no one would notice. In that moment, the exhaustion drained away, replaced by the quiet, surgical focus I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was what I used to be, an investigator who understood the anatomy of fire and the psychology of arsonists who think they can rewrite truth with flames. The night pressed around me, heavy and alive. Somewhere in town, Karen was probably asleep in her perfect house, her yellow blazer hanging neatly in the closet. The scent of smoke already fading from her conscience. She'd probably told herself the story she always tells, that she was right. That order must be restored. That chaos deserves to burn. But I knew better. I'd seen enough to understand that what she wanted wasn't order, it was control. And fire was her final language. As I looked back toward the hospital windows, where the faint outline of Lily's bed glowed behind the curtain, I whispered the truth to the night. A vow, a promise, and a warning all at once. No, this wasn't carelessness. It was control. The night after the hospital vigil, sleep didn't come. The air inside our house still smelled faintly of burned paper, maybe from my clothes, maybe from memory. I sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp cutting through the dark, staring at the photographs I'd taken from the ruins. Melted pipes, blackened floorboards, a warped sprinkler head glinting under flashlight glare. I had seen these things before, Not here, not in this life, but in another one I had left behind years ago. The one that began with a badge and ended with a folded resignation letter. Before I was an attorney, before I spent my days drafting reports for public safety boards and speaking at dull conferences about liability law, I was a state fire marshal. 13 years of crawling through soot and rubble, tracing the geometry of destruction. Every flame has a signature, a direction, a pattern, a pulse that tells you where it was born and why it grew. I used to say that fire, when understood, never lies. People do. I'd left the job after a warehouse explosion took 2 of my colleagues. The official cause had been electrical malfunction. I'd found traces of sabotage, political, deliberate. I learned then that truth has a price, and sometimes silence is survival. But now, staring at the photos of my daughter's school, the silence I once mastered felt like betrayal. The burn patterns on the carpet near the west wall, too clean, too controlled, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't random combustion. It was a guided blaze. Someone had poured a volatile compound in a crescent pattern, ignited it low, and disabled the suppression system before walking out. A perfect, quiet fire at dawn. I drove back to the ruins. The police tape flapped in the wind, brittle and half-torn. The school grounds were empty, except for a lone security guard half-dozing in his car. I parked down the block, waited, and slipped through the side gate. The air was damp, the kind that carries the ghost of smoke long after the flames are gone. Inside, the library looked skeletal, beams like ribs, the floor dusted with gray ash. The silence was absolute. I crouched near the sprinkler valve, running my gloved fingers over the melted metal. It had been turned off manually. I could see the wrench impressions faintly etched into the soft brass. I took photos, carefully angling them under the flashlight to preserve shadows and depth. My breath fogged in the cool air. I knelt there for nearly half an hour, every motion methodical, controlled. Old habits resurfaced effortlessly, marking, bagging, photographing. It felt like stepping into the skin of someone I used to be, someone sharper, colder. When I stepped back outside, I noticed something odd. The maintenance tag on the valve wasn't the usual district-issued one. It bore a private company name, Aldridge Facilities and Maintenance Co. For a moment, I just stared at it, the name burning into my mind. Aldridge, Karen's last name. I took another photo, zooming in until the letters filled the screen. A few hours later, at home, I searched the state registry database. The company had a modest portfolio: schools, community centers, HO and managed facilities. The listed owner and operations manager, Richard Aldridge, age 54. Karen's brother. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of my own heartbeat filling the quiet. She hadn't just meddled in policy or paperwork. She had engineered the infrastructure that kept the entire district in her grasp. The fire system, the maintenance contracts, the very mechanisms of safety, all under her family's control. If anyone questioned her, she could hide behind the illusion of oversight. Her fingerprints weren't on the accelerant. They were on the contracts. The more I read, the clearer it became. The maintenance logs for the library's sprinkler system showed the last inspection marked as cleared and functional, signed just 1 week before the fire, by R. Aldridge, and beneath that, in the remarks column, one short note: manual override functional. Do not engage without authorization. I printed every page, laying them across the table like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting years to be solved. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the documents, listening to the ticking clock. The quiet stretched until it became unbearable. Then, almost instinctively, I reached for my old badge, the one I'd kept locked in a box since the day I quit. The brass was tarnished, the engraving faint, but the weight in my palm was steady, grounding. That badge had once meant duty. Tonight, it meant something else. Witness. Later, as the sun rose, I found myself outside Karen's perfect home. Her curtains were still drawn. her garden arranged in symmetrical rows. Even from the sidewalk, I could see the faint reflection of her yellow blazer hanging by the door like a trophy. She built her world so carefully, her networks, her image, her shields. She believed power lived in visibility, but my kind of power lived in silence. I turned away before her lights flicked on, before curiosity could become confrontation. This wasn't the time, not yet. Justice, I learned long ago, doesn't strike fast. It builds like pressure in a pipe, invisible until the moment it explodes. When I got home, I filed the documents into a new folder on my desk. I labeled it simply, Chain of Ignition, underneath. I slid the photos of the sprinkler valve, the maintenance record, the screenshot of her HOA statement. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one line at the top of the page, a promise, not to her, but to myself. She built her shield in plain sight. I built mine in silence. The basement became my war room. Not the shouting kind, the quiet kind, the kind where truth is built, piece by piece in the dark. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper and printer ink, a scent that clung to everything now. On the far wall, I'd pinned photographs of the fire site, close-ups of melted pipes, fragments of shelf metal, even the faint outline of the maintenance company's tag bearing the Aldrich name. Strings of red thread connected them to documents, receipts, and printouts, a web of cause and motive. The single bulb overhead hummed like a low-grade siren. I started with a call I hadn't made in years. "James, it's me," I said into the receiver. There was a pause, then a gravelly chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. Graves. Thought you'd gone civilian for good." "Hi-hat," I said, until someone decided to burn a library with my daughter in it. James Porter had been my partner back in the Marshal Service. One of the few men who never let bureaucracy dilute his instinct. He'd retired to a quieter life, consulting occasionally for the county fire division. I trusted him more than anyone left in the system. I sent him the photos I'd taken and the maintenance log I'd uncovered. For hours that night, the line buzzed between us with silence and short bursts of analysis. "That valve wasn't faulty," he said finally. "Those torque marks? They're fresh. You can tell by the scrape depth and oxidation pattern. Someone shut it off within 24 hours of ignition." "I figured," I said quietly. "In the name on the tag, Aldrich Facilities." He whistled low. "That's a conflict of interest if I've ever seen one. You'll need to secure the originals before they vanish, okay?" By morning, I was drafting formal requests through my old channels. I still had contacts in the county attorney's office, mostly former students from when I'd guest lectured on forensic testimony. One of them, Ada Melissa Crane, owed me a favor. I called her cell. "I need a subpoena for the district's maintenance records," I told her. "Specifically, sprinkler and alarm inspections for Cedar Ridge Middle." There was hesitation on her end. "If this ties to an active contract under HOA jurisdiction, you're stepping into municipal politics. They'll stonewall you, then make it fast," I said. "Before they know, I'm asking." That same afternoon, I drove to the hospital to see Ms. Harmon. She was recovering slowly, her hands still bandaged from burns she'd gotten trying to drag Lily toward the exit. Her voice rasped like sandpaper, but her eyes were steady. I remember what she said. She told me, her tone measured, each word an effort. "Karen." She nodded. She came in around 5:15. I told her Lily was still finishing up. She said, "Good. Maybe this will teach her not to play hero in other people's spaces." "Did anyone else hear her?" I asked. "Just me," she said. But she reached toward the nightstand, sliding over a small digital recorder. "I started carrying this after the budget meetings. You never know when you'll need proof." She pressed play. Static crackled. Then a familiar voice filled the room. Calm, clipped. "Unmistakably Karen's. If the board won't control these renovations, I will. Some lessons need fire to stick." The words landed like a spark in dry timber. "Keep this safe," I told her. "I trust you more than the school board," she said, and I believed her. Over the next week, I built my case in silence. Each night, my basement grew heavier with evidence, time-stamped emails, purchase orders for cleaning supplies that included accelerant chemicals, even a maintenance invoice signed by Richard Aldrich 2 days before the fire. Every line connected her further to intent. But Karen wasn't blind. She felt the air shifting. Witnesses began to receive phone calls, polite at first, then unnerving. Ms. Harmon's friend from the PTA reported a black SUV idling outside her home for 3 nights in a row. The janitor who'd seen Karen into the library suddenly recanted his statement, claiming he must have mixed up the date. Fear moved through the neighborhood like smoke, invisible but suffocating. I kept my composure, outwardly calm, inwardly calculating. The law is patient. It needs time to sharpen its blades. I compiled everything into labeled envelopes, sealing each one with evidence markers. I even bought a new lockbox for the flash drives containing footage and audio. Then, at James's insistence, I sent duplicates to an off-site cloud repository under an encrypted alias. "If they try to bury you," he'd said, "make sure the truth crawls out on its own." One night, while reviewing the forensic photos, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Graves," the voice said, low, urgent. It was James. "You're not going to like this," he continued. "I had a friend run the chemical sample you sent from the valve. We matched the residue to what? Industrial accelerant, specifically Solvoprime. It's restricted to licensed maintenance crews. Only 5 companies in this county have access." He paused. "Aldrich Facilities is one of them." My pulse slowed, the world narrowing into clarity. "That's enough for probable cause," I murmured. "More than enough," he said. "But you'll need to move carefully. They'll know the net's closing moments after the call ended." I sat back and stared at the wall of evidence. Photos, charts, strings of red thread connecting her name to every turning gear in this machine of deceit. It wasn't rage that filled me now. It was precision, the kind of focus that only truth can demand. As midnight approached, my phone rang again, a soft, encrypted ping from Melissa Crane. Her message was short: subpoena approved. Logs to be delivered under seal within 48 hours. I exhaled slowly, almost a prayer. The pieces were falling into place. Then, one more message flashed on the screen from James, sent barely a minute later. No greeting, no context, just 5 words that turned the quiet room electric. "We've got our prints on the valve." The line went dead. The bulb overhead flickered once, casting my reflection over the evidence board. For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to smile, not out of triumph, but out of certainty. The fire had tried to erase the truth. Instead, it had engraved her signature in metal. I spent the next 48 hours building my battlefield, not of smoke and embers, but of evidence, paper, and law. My basement looked like a crime lab stitched to a newsroom, printer humming, phone recording, tabs open across my laptop like war fronts. I'd learned long ago that real revenge doesn't come from rage, it comes from record keeping. So I began to turn every heartbeat into documentation. On the corkboard above my desk, I outlined the operation, 3 columns, each labeled in my old block lettering. 1. Negligence. 2. Fraud. 3. Control. Every thread from Karen's empire ran through those words. Negligence was simple. She'd tampered with a life safety system through a company her family owned. Fraud came next, the money. I had receipts showing HOA donations rerouted into community maintenance contracts, all awarded to Aldrich Facilities. In control, that was the invisible hand, the part no one saw. How she weaponized policy and fear to manipulate everyone beneath her. From teachers to city inspectors. I called Melissa Crane first. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp, efficient. "You're not just building a case for arson anymore, Graves," she said. "You're building one for systemic fraud." "Exactly," I replied. "And I want both cases to merge in the public eye, not just the court." She exhaled. "You're going after her publicly?" "I'm going after the truth," I said. "If she built her power on reputation, that's where I'll hit her. Not in shadows, in daylight." That night, I drafted the strategy like a military order. Phase 1, secure chain of custody. Every photo, every document, every recording needed timestamp verification and affidavit authentication. I had James handle the physical samples, accelerant residue, the valve, the inspection tags. He ran them through his old contacts in the state lab. They'd arrive, stamped and notarized, admissible under Federal Rule of Evidence 901B1. No room for tampering. Phase 2, leverage. I needed allies who could amplify the case once it hit. A quiet ally from the Cedar Chronicle, a reporter named Dana Leo, owed me from a safety expose I'd ghostwritten years ago. I sent her a single photo, the Aldridge maintenance tag half melted against the sprinkler valve. Her reply came in under 10 minutes. "Tell me when I can publish. This story's going to burn." Phase 3, containment. I couldn't afford a smear war. Karen would fight back, and she'd be brutal. She still held influence with the HOA board and half the school council. So I began prepping witnesses for intimidation defense. Ms. Harmon, still healing, agreed to give her statement to the Ada under seal. The janitor, guilt-ridden, came forward after I showed him proof the security footage had been wiped remotely through a login, traced to Aldridge Facilities Network. Fear turned into resolve once he saw his name wouldn't be the only one exposed. Meanwhile, Karen was already moving. Anonymous HOA newsletters began circulating, painting me as a disgruntled parent, spreading misinformation for sympathy. A local blogger posted that I'd leaked confidential student data. I didn't flinch. The louder she got, the closer she was to panic. I used her noise to buy time. Every attack she launched gave Melissa leverage for civil discovery under the grounds of defamation and obstruction. Every insult became evidence of consciousness of guilt. We weren't just fighting for proof now. We were building narrative credibility. It's the same way prosecutors craft opening statements. Because truth alone doesn't sway a jury story does. In those days, I barely slept. I lived on coffee, adrenaline, and the sound of my daughter breathing through the baby monitor I had reinstalled in her room, just in case the world tried again. Sometimes I'd find her awake, watching the ceiling shadows. "You're not going back there, right?" she'd ask quietly. "Not until it's safe," I'd tell her. She'd nod. "Then make it safe, Dad." That was all the permission I needed. The final part of the plan came together in whispers. Canned late-night calls, a dual strike, legal and public. Melissa would file both a civil suit and a criminal complaint simultaneously, backed by the subpoenaed evidence. Dana would publish her article at the same time the filing went live. Photos, documents, quotes from witnesses. No secrets, no warning to keep the element of surprise. We used an encrypted drop system. Dana uploaded the full story under embargo, waiting for my signal. The title alone felt like thunder. The fire that wasn't an accident. How power, money, and silence burned Cedar Ridge. Every angle was covered. Motive, method, and connection. James handled chain of custody affidavits. Melissa coordinated with a federal safety investigator to reclassify the fire as suspicious with probable intent. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about accountability. How many systems she'd corrupted. How many signatures she'd twisted into compliance. But even in victory's shadow, I refused anger. Anger was her weapon. Calm precision would be mine. So I wrote the final legal draft myself, line by line, citing every statute I once enforced, grounding every paragraph in fact. I included the audio recording from Ms. Harmon, the chemical analysis, the inspection conflict, and the digital trace logs. It was more than evidence. It was a mirror. When dawn finally broke, my printer spat out the last page of the lawsuit. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds, striping the desk in pale gold. I gathered the stack, clipped it neatly, and set it in the center of the table. The cover page bore the title, Graves v. Aldrich, ETL. I read the first sentence aloud, not to anyone, but to the air that had once carried smoke. Plaintiff alleges that defendant, through willful negligence, orchestrated acts resulting in endangerment, arson, and fraud within the Cedar Ridge district. The words were heavy, deliberate like steel laid on paper. Outside, the world was quiet. My daughter still slept upstairs, her breathing soft through the monitor. I exhaled, closed the file, and slid it into the briefcase that used to carry crime scene reports years ago. This time, the weapon wasn't fire. It was truth, bound and notarized, ready to ignite everything she'd built. And as the first light of morning cut across the room, I whispered the vow that had been burning in me since that night in the smoke. This time, the fire will burn through paper, not walls. Night had thinned into a hard, copper dawn by the time we stepped onto the courthouse plaza. Concrete, still cold underfoot. The sky, a pale bruise over the city. I could feel the cameras before I saw them. Lenses like small black eyes. Microphones extended like probing hands. The timing was precise. Everything had to be. The plaza smelled of coffee and damp paper. Camera motors worry like distant insects. Reporters clustered in a semicircle, breath visible in the morning air. Behind them, the courthouse steps rose austere and gray, columns like sentinels. I stood at the podium with Melissa to my left, her expression made of the same steel I remember from courtroom days, and Dana waiting at the perimeter with a hard drive humming in her bag. James had flown in that morning and handed me the chain of custody. Envelopes like a priest passing communion. One for the valve, one for the accelerant analysis, one for the security footage. Each envelope carried a neat stamp, a notary signature, and a time. The boxes of evidence smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. But to me, they smelled like leverage. First, we released the footage, not the whole file. Nothing that would prejudice a jury or violate an ongoing discovery. But the clip that mattered, 47 seconds, grainy and raw, showing a yellow sleeve crossing the frame. The camera light flickering, then the static where the feed was interrupted. The clip was played on a loop on an embedded screen behind me, the image pulsing across the plaza like a heartbeat. Shutter clicks increased in tempo. Someone shouted a question, swallowed by others. The sound was immediate and animal, the press inhaling, waiting for the first sign of vulnerability. I spoke slowly, each word chosen like a tile placed on a floor that needed to bear weight. Today, we release evidence obtained under subpoena, I said, voice steady. This footage has been authenticated. Its chain of custody has been preserved and is available for the court. We are not seeking headlines. We seek accountability, Said the words Title II and Ada deliberately letting them land. We invoked Title II protections because student safety is not optional. The law requires equal access to safe learning environments. And where a threat exists, the system must answer. The murmurs rose. Legal terms, travel fast, and a crowd that loves certainty. Karen's lawyer was predictably first to speak. A man with a close haircut and a tie that tried too hard to be blue. He called the footage circumstantial and accused us of a prejudicial media campaign. This is defamation by design, he said, voice oily, then filed the predictable demand for retraction. A reporter barked a question about ethics. Another asked me if I was seeking an injunction. My answer was simple. We are seeking injunctive relief to protect students, civil damages for gross negligence, and criminal referral for arson and reckless endangerment. The legal words felt like tools in my mouth, precise, exacting the second cinematic beat came as witnesses began to step forward. Miss Harmon read her statement into a microphone with a voice still rough from smoke. The exact time Karen entered, the words she'd heard, the way the light had caught the blazer. The janitor, after weeks of intimidation, provided his notarized affidavit confirming he'd seen Karen on the premises that afternoon and that a remote login to the security cam was traced back to Aldrich Facilities Network. Melissa displayed the lab report. Solvo Prime identified and matched 2 inventory records for Aldrich Facilities. The forensic analyst on call explained, in plain terms, how the valve had been manually turned off and how the residue pattern indicated purposeful placement. Each factual beat made the narrative lean forward. The sound of cameras grew louder, the plaza a cauldron of focused noise. Emotion clicked under everything, the librarian's hands trembling as she handed her recorded statement to the ADA. The way the prosecutor's jaw tightened. Karen arrived late, of course. She stood beneath the courthouse portico, like a portrait someone had set against the sky. Up close, the blazer was the exact yellow-eyed etched into my memory. Bright, stubborn, almost obscene against the morning. Her face was composed, the practiced composure of someone who had always believed image was armor. But there was a tremor in her fingers when she took the podium. Her lawyer tried the familiar playbook, attacked the messenger, called for voir dire on the admissibility of the footage, warned about prejudice. He spoke of procedural errors and fabricated narratives, called our filing a calculated public spectacle. Reporters scribbled. The crowd watched for a crack, and then the moment that splintered whatever polish she'd kept. I read the statement I'd written the night before. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I read with the calm cadence of someone who had spent years persuading courts with evidence rather than emotion. We bring this action not to destroy reputations, but to restore safety, I said. We have preserved the chain of custody. We possess time-stamped maintenance logs, a lab-confirmed accelerant match, a witness audio of an explicit threat, and now authenticated footage placing a person affiliated with Aldrich Facilities at the scene. We seek truth under Title II and the protections intended to keep our children safe. The plaza held its breath. Somewhere in the sea of microphones, a camera lens focused so tightly I could see the tiny reflection of my face in it. Karen's mouth moved, first to deny, then to recalibrate. The practiced smile slipped for a fraction of a second, a humanizing imperfection. Her eyes darted to her brother in the crowd, to the folders clutched in his hands, and then to the reporters who'd swarmed the courthouse with printed copies of the maintenance invoices. I watched the color leave her face, not dramatically, but like ink washed out of cloth. Her voice, when it came, was thin. This is irresponsible. Her lawyer escalated to threats of countersuits, but the cadence of his words couldn't mend the slow movement of the narrative. Evidence, authenticated and layered, had begun to outpace the story she'd constructed. Reporters surged as she turned to leave. Microphones thrust forward like stakes. Cameras leaned in as if to capture the moment her mask finally slid. She moved through the crowd, not hurried, but determined to appear so. And in the back of the swarm, her yellow sleeve flashed once, a bright slash against the gray steps. A reporter called out, "Ms. Aldrich, did you tamper with safety equipment?" Another, "Do you deny the accelerant match?" She didn't answer. She climbed into her car, slammed the door. And for a second, the whole plaza heard the engine cough as if the vehicle itself were reluctant to carry her away. Then she drove forward, her image reflected in the rear view. A woman fleeing attention, not guilt. Cameras followed. The clip looped across feeds within minutes. As the crowd thinned and the deputies guided us off the steps, Melissa leaned toward me and said, softly, "We've done what we had to do. Now we let process finish the job." I nodded, feeling the weight of the morning collect in my chest like a new instrument of resolve. The third beat, emotional, closed the moment. The brief, private look Lily gave me when she arrived with Miss Harmon to stand behind me on those last steps, eyes wide, clutching my hand as if to anchor both of us. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The camera had captured something no courtroom could deny: a father, unbowed, offering evidence instead of rage, and a community starting to ask whether they're ordered. Peace had been built on someone else's danger. We left the plaza with more than headlines. We left with public record, with subpoenas served on Aldridge facilities, with a sealed criminal referral filed with the district attorney's office. The media would have its frenzy in the legal system, its slow, methodical machinery, voir dire, discovery, and all the formalities that make justice deliberate. But as we walked away and the first articles began to appear on phones and feeds, a single thought settled in. Once you put sunlight on rot, it either wilts or it fights. Either way, it is revealed. The war she thought she'd hidden behind rules had, in daylight, already begun to burn. The blowback came fast, like smoke curling back through a broken window. By sunrise the next morning, the story that had broken Karen Aldridge's composure on those courthouse steps had already begun to fracture under 1,000 versions of her truth. The HOA's Facebook page, usually a sleepy corner of recipe swaps and lost dog alerts, had turned into a war zone. Anonymous posts accused me of fabricating evidence and milking a tragedy for attention. Some came from fake accounts, others from real neighbors hiding behind politeness and plausible deniability. Hard to believe a father could twist a fire into politics. One comment read, another said, maybe he's cashing in on sympathy. By mid-afternoon, the rumors grew teeth. Screenshots from my old fire marshal ID circulated online, twisted into conspiracy threads. Former investigator plants his own fire for payout. I stared at the words on my phone. It's not angry, just cold. Karen had always known how to weaponize perception. This was her terrain at the school board. The damage deepened. Half the members now distanced themselves from the investigation, muttering about media interference. A closed-door meeting leaked minutes later, showing the superintendent had ordered an internal review of my conduct for possible procedural violations. I'd filed the lawsuit as a private citizen, but the narrative they painted was that I was using my old badge to harass an innocent woman. Melissa called me that evening, her voice clipped but steady. Don't respond publicly, she said. Let the filings speak. We're past the court of gossip. Karen doesn't need truth, I told her. She needs noise. Stay quiet, she said. Noise dies faster than clarity. But clarity felt like a fragile luxury when the threat started. The first letter arrived, folded in a white HOA, enveloped, no return address. Inside, one line typed on plain paper. You don't know who you're dealing with. 2 days later came another, in red ink this time. Drop it before she drops you. I didn't show Lily. I burned both letters in the sink. Watched the words curl and vanish into smoke that smelled faintly of old paper and fear at night. I started locking the doors twice, checking the windows 3 times. Old instincts returned, measured, methodical. I noticed a black sedan parked 2 houses down for 3 consecutive nights. The third night, I walked straight up to it with a flashlight. The driver rolled down his window, just enough for the beam to catch his eyes. Lost, I asked. He didn't answer. The car pulled away, taillights vanishing into the fog. Lily's sleep grew restless. She'd wake gasping, the word smoke trembling on her lips. Once, I found her sitting up, staring at the flicker of the nightlight, like it might burst into flame. It's not real, sweetheart, I told her, holding her hand until her breathing slowed. But I could see if the trauma had stitched itself into her dreams. Every headline, every whisper at school, reopened it. Parents began pulling their children from group projects with her, or murmuring excuses about attention and controversy. Miss Harmon called me one evening, her voice low. They've started questioning my memory, she said. Anonymous emails. They're saying I fabricated the recording. Don't delete anything, I told her. Every threat is evidence. I saved copies of every post, every message, every smeared digital ashes stored in cloud folders labeled with dates and IP traces. I'd learned that even lies leave fingerprints, and lies, when exposed under subpoena, glow brighter than fire. Still, the toll bled through the calm. Each day, I moved through routines with mechanical grace coffee, case files, school drop-off file. Inside me, something coiled tighter. I'd walk through the neighborhood, past homes that once waved at me, now turning blinds just slightly. Karen's house, immaculate, as always, glowed at night like a shrine. The yellow porch light she'd always kept on had never looked more like a warning flare. James called from out of state. She's pulling the political strings, he said. Rumor is she's hiring a crisis PR firm. I expected that, I said. What about the lab report? It's watertight. Chain of custody, intact. The chemical trace matches Aldridge Facilities inventory exactly. They can't bury that. Then let them shout, I said quietly. Every lie she tells buys me another page of credibility. On the fourth night, a rock hit our mailbox. No note, no name, just a hollow clang echoing through the street. I found Lily sitting on the porch steps, eyes wide but dry. They want us scared, she said. Her voice didn't shake. That strength quiet, inherited, broke something in me and rebuilt it all at once. I knelt beside her. They think fear is power, I said. But power's just noise until it's proven. That weekend, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Karen arrived dressed like a savior white blouse, pale pearls, eyes rimmed in theatrical exhaustion. She spoke of harassment, emotional damage, and witch hunts. The crowd murmured sympathy. When I stood to respond, she raised her hand first. Mr. Graves, she said sweetly, I know grief clouds judgment, but spreading false accusations hurts everyone. I looked around at the neighbors, at faces that had once shared potlucks and Christmas lights, now drawn and uncertain. The truth doesn't need to shout, I said. It survives. Then I left before the meeting adjourned. Behind me, voices rose, some angry, some afraid. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd mapped my strategy weeks ago. The papers still lay there, neat, untouched. Outside, fog rolled through the street, soft and silver under the streetlights. I thought about everything she'd built an empire of compliance and how it was beginning to crack, not from assault or from exposure. They wanted chaos. I would give them precision. They wanted fear. I would give them evidence. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered to the quiet house, to the ghosts of burned pages and buried lies. If they want smoke, I said, voice steady, I'll give them light. It was a Monday evening when the message arrived, anonymous, unsigned. Time-stamped, 6:42 p.m. The subject line read, only, you missed a camera. No greeting, no preamble. Just a single link beneath it and one attachment. Asterisk, footage, underscore, 17b.mp for asterisk. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen, the cursor pulsing beside the text like a heartbeat. Every instinct I had, the investigator, the father, K, the man who'd been fighting ghosts of smoke for months. I downloaded the file onto a secure drive, disconnected my Wi-Fi, and opened it in isolation. The screen filled with the familiar grain of low light, footage jangled high from the building's maintenance hallway. Not one of the public cameras, not the main security feed. This was the backup, the one the maintenance team used to monitor the utility access corridor beside the library. The timestamp matched the day of the fire. 17 hours, 11 minutes, and 4 seconds. Karen appeared within seconds. She stepped into frame, calm as a surgeon. Her posture perfect, her yellow blazer glowing faintly beneath the emergency strip lighting. She carried a leather tote, the kind she always brought to meetings, heavy and swinging against her leg. For 35 seconds, she stood perfectly still before the sprinkler control panel. then looked over her shoulder once, just enough for the camera to catch her face, and then, with the deliberate focus of someone following steps they'd rehearsed, she pulled a small silver key from her pocket, inserted it into the panel, turned it. The indicator light switched from armed to manual override. Next, she reached into her bag and withdrew a small plastic jug clear, labeled with a manufacturer's sticker. She unscrewed the cap, poured a thin stream along the baseboard beneath the doorframe, then wiped the nozzle with a tissue and tucked both back into her tote. The footage ended 30 seconds later with her walking away, as calm as if she'd just watered a plant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound that escaped me wasn't anger, it was release. The exhale that comes when months of gaslighting, rumor, and threat finally coalesce into proof. I leaned forward, hit pause, and took in every frame. The precise turn of the key, the label's partial word, solve, the pattern of the liquid on the floor. It wasn't just evidence. It was confession, written in light and movement. I sent the file to Melissa through our encrypted line. My message brief: we have her.